let's just begin here and just how about you guys just kind of introduce yourself here one moment, and then yeah, maybe you
Yeah.
guys introduce yourself one moment, and then
Okay.
again we'll try to get cold again. So and then
Yeah.
while you guys introduce yourself, so
Yeah. Okay.
and what
Well.
you guys do, and
Yeah.
kind of what you guys do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, briefly, my name's Jordan. I'm managing director of Convequity, which is an equity research firm, and my partner is Simon. Um, my background is actually working kind of in broker capacities throughout the financial industry, working on a sales trading desk and then working as a financial advisor. And then eventually I moved across to being an equity analyst, an independent one first, and then set up Convequity a few years ago. And I reached out to my network and managed to find Simon, who was also very interested in starting an equity research business. So yeah, it's kind of been me and Simon ever since, really. And what Convequity is about is we're big believers in getting a deeper understanding of stocks in order to generate alpha. You know, we think there's a lot of alpha hidden in stocks, but if you can get a deeper understanding on how the technology actually works, so we try to blend finance and investment theory with a deeper understanding of stocks on a technical side. And whilst we're doing that, we hope that we break down the knowledge barriers that are not a lot of investors face when they're reviewing technology stocks. So, Simon?
Yeah, hi guys. It's Simon here. So I was an online forum manager, kind of covering the consumer electronics. So that's the place where I break into understanding more about the technology. And I took my undergrad in finance, and I found that there's tremendous amount of alpha that we can make by combining the understanding of finance, valuation, and investing together with the understanding of technology within one domain. So that's where we got started and create our value to investors, right, Francis?
Francis, I can see that Cole is now a speaker. So perhaps, Cole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, of course. Thanks for bearing with me there. So I'm Cole Gromas. I write a publication called Strategy of Security, which is focused on the intersection, I would say, of business and cybersecurity. Before that, I was a director at PwC in the cybersecurity and privacy practice for 12 years. And I will also be announcing in public tomorrow that I'm a senior advisor for Momentum Cyber as well.
Oh,
Oh,
great,
wonderful.
great news. Yes, Cole, I read Francis put send me your blog to my way, and I had a read of a couple of your articles, and really enlightening. I totally agree with everything you said. So it'd be interesting to discuss a bit around that as well.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, no, super excited for this and just how this goes. That's awesome. So how about like let's just say so I think we have like just someone from a technical side. Simon's extremely on the technical side. Obviously brings a little of finance to this. Same with you, Simon. You come from the finance world as well as you studying security. So you guys have also gone deep into the sector. And I think for Cole, like obviously he's come from from the consultant side where you've spoken to lots of Fortune 500 businesses about how they're dealing with cybersecurity. So I think we've got a pretty good blend and mix of speakers tonight. So maybe let's just start high level, like kind of like the current landscape. Stocks are down. They've been down for probably over the last 6 months here, and obviously we're seeing cybersecurity names are relatively holding up better than most other names. And so, do you guys want to just on a very high level, just kind of your thoughts on the space and how kind of things are evolving and what you guys are seeing from you guys' different angles?
Yeah, well, I can just quickly add something there. I mean, yeah, we I think there's a few cybersecurity names that are holding up. Um, against this market turmoil a little bit better than other software stocks. The drawdowns haven't been as steep. Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks are two companies that I have in mind. And it kind of, to me, my take from that is that cybersecurity is becoming increasingly a non-discretionary spend within software, which is typically a discretionary sector. And that is because of all the tailwinds that we're seeing at the moment. We're seeing an increase in the IT sprawl because we have organisations having multi-cloud deployments. They're also managing stuff on prem. They have stuff managed at the edge. They've got various new things coming online. So there's that, and then you've also got developers running wild in the cloud. You've got a rise in the sophistication of cyber attacks. So you've got all these tailwinds that is making cybersecurity increasingly important as the landscape becomes increasingly fragmented. And so even though we are experiencing a downturn market-wise and economic-wise, and potentially there is talk of a recession around the corner, I think cybersecurity companies, especially broad-based cybersecurity companies like Palo Alto Networks and Fortinet, will fare quite well. I think their services will continue to be in strong demand.
Yeah, if I may add, I would just say that the primary driver for the recent drawdown of the stock market is interest rate. So as we have rising interest rates, people will start to readjust their discounting rate for each stock. So for higher growth and money losing companies, people will assign a higher discount rate, and therefore their valuation will come down. So investors are readjusting their expectations right now. And what we are seeing with cybersecurity companies in general is that they are actually beating the expectations. So, which is pretty surprising given other sectors are coming down. Things like consumer spending, the retail sectors, they are going down and guiding lower. But for companies like Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks, they continue to be strong, and it generates tons of surprise for institutional investors as well. And they are actually guiding up their guidance for the year, and they have built a higher backlog for their physical products. So that's a bit of surprising fact, and I think that's also the driver for why Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks are holding up better.
I totally agree on the estimate earnings front. At the end of Q1, I think we definitely saw this from Zscaler to Fortinet. We saw this from as well as Palo Alto Network that beat by over double digits. So what about you, Cole? What are your perspective and like kind of the angle you're coming from?
Yeah, I would add to it from the operator perspective, just to give a little bit different point of view than the financial side of it that's been put forth so far. I think if you look at it from a CISO's perspective, and then translate that back to the market, like cybersecurity companies are just building something that people want in Y Combinator parlance, I suppose. But the reality is that the problems are very deep in cybersecurity, and they're not going away. If anything, they're intensifying. And so when you kind of abstract that away from broader market conditions, the problem still has to be dealt with. And so, obviously companies don't have unlimited budgets to spend on cybersecurity and defending themselves, but it's also, as has been mentioned, it's not an area that they can really cut back on either. And so I think that's a big part of the reason why at least the very well put together companies in the space are holding up well, is because the problem truly is a problem.
Absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. And maybe let's talk on that budget thing. Like maybe let's kind of go deeper a little bit. Like, I spoke to a security a security architect, like one of a higher level person at one of the largest semiconductor companies in the U.S. And he had also mentioned the same thing too. Like budgets are they're not unlimited. Like there's kind of a cap on spending, but at the same time, if they need to buffer up that if they need to buffer up, they're not willing to maybe spend. But do you guys want to touch a little bit more on just that budget piece and kind of the fact that like budgets might not be unlimited in specific cases, and do you guys maybe see that coming to an end towards the end of the year as well? And then what are your thoughts on that in general, if anyone has any?
Yeah, I think that's actually a question that I would ask um, to Cole as well, because right now what I'm seeing is that because there is an imminent economic downturn driven by the Fed and all central banks around the world, they are trying to raise the interest rate. And inevitably, they are facing a trade off between inflation and the economic growth. And right now, the priority is really about keeping the inflation down. So inevitably, we will face an economic downturn. So I think corporations they are readjusting their budgeting as well. And I think we could expect a little bit of slowdown or even a year-over-year decline in terms of budgeting, and maybe we will going back to March 2020 scenario whereby corporations they will cut budget and prioritize cash flow to reserve some financial cushion. And in that case, maybe we could see a bit of softening for the cybersecurity sector as well. But also, there is a new norm. The new norm is that the threat landscape is heightened, and the need to spend over cybersecurity is even higher. So it's a non-discretionary spending. And furthermore, what we are seeing is that as we are exiting the pandemic, um, people previously who spent on the cloud, they are kind of repatriating to the physical on-prem data center spending. So that may be part of the driving force behind higher spending over the next generation firewall and some other on-premise spending.
Anything that you would add in terms of just budget being capped at certain companies, or do you guys think that's unlimited in your perspectives? Maybe Jordan, and then I could go back to Cole here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't. Obviously, there must be a cap on the budgets even for cybersecurity, but I just think the landscape is so treacherous at the moment. It's going to be the last line of the IT budget to cut. Because of the rise in sophistication in attacks, we've got these bad actors being funded by nation states and cyber criminal groups, and they're using this funding to automate their reconnaissance and their attacks, and then you've got a shortage of cybersecurity talent as well, which is just exacerbating things. It's just making it really, really difficult for security teams to defend themselves against these attacks. And we've also now got the IT sprawl because of these hybrid environments where we've got multi-cloud and we've got on-prem deployments that organizations are managing. Um, so yeah, in a downturn, economic downturn, I think it will be the last line of the IT budget to be cut. And familiar names with solid reputations that can provide broad-based services like Fortinet and Palo Alto Networks and a few others will, in my opinion, be favoured over point solution or more niche or more narrowly focused cybersecurity vendors. Um, that's my general take. If there is going to be a squeeze, then they could, CISOs can save money by going with the broad based players. And my take is also with the CISOs cannot, and they're kind of in a dichotomy. A lot of the CISOs because they want the best of breed point solutions, but at the same time they want to do vendor consolidation as well. And in my opinion, with Palo Alto Networks especially, they can almost have their cake and eat it because Palo Alto Networks is a very broad-based cybersecurity platform, but within that, it also has best of breed point solutions as well. So, going with a company like Palo Alto Networks, and there aren't many like Palo Alto, they can save their costs. And also deliver strong security. Zscaler as well, potentially because they are quite cost effective in their SASE solutions, but for me, not as broad based as someone like Palo Alto Networks. Cole, do you want to add to that more?
Yeah, a couple more macro level points to add. So one, just in terms of where budgets are at in general within organizations, I think we have to remember here that security budgets are still kind of playing catch up on a long-term basis at a lot of companies. Of course, there are large and kind of more forward-looking enterprises that have raised their security budgets substantially a lot earlier than others. But the reality is, some companies are still catching up, especially if you think like in the OT manufacturing, like ICS type space. And so that's part of it is yes, the economy plays a role in that, but I think the reality is still that like budgets need to get to a level where they probably should have been a long time ago. The second macro level point is also that a big part of what's going to get companies through this economic downturn, however long it ends up lasting, is going to be driven by digital transformation, to use the buzzword. But point being, technology will be a big part of the recovery and the longevity for a lot of companies. And I think there's a better realization now that cybersecurity is a big part of that. And so you start to get some of those massive investments, towards building, technology properties, products, et cetera, spent on cybersecurity budgets under the guise of business enablement, opposed to it just being a cost center. And so I think that's also another important factor of what's going to drive budgets going forward.
I totally agree with that, Cole. Our observations is that once security was almost like a burden to the budget. It's something that organizations had to spend on, but unwillingly. But there's been a merge with because the security is merging with networking, but there's also security vendors are now being seen as productivity enablers. Right, we're not just being productivity blockers, we're being productivity enablers, and that's kind of changing the perception of security and security vendors in general. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think specifically to call out sectors, I mean, non-comprehensive list, but the obvious ones, digital identity, especially anything that has to do with customer identity, is a pretty big deal. I would say that, like you mentioned Cloudflare, and like actually being involved on the network side is a pretty big deal. And yeah, so I think there's multiple sectors that are really going to stand out in this period too.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have seen decades of underinvesting for the cybersecurity sector, and there is a general lack of professional labor within the sector as well. So more automated, productive solution will be demanded irrespective of economic drawdown, or they will be even more demanded because we are seeing wage pressure. So if you have automated solution that is going to justify your ROI, return over investment, it will continue to be a successful product.
I think the other interesting minor addition to that too is you've also got kind of a labor shift, and that's where something like DevSecOps or like an actual product like Sneak would come in. In the case of Sneak, right, you can give a developer a security tool like Sneak, and you can kind of make them a security person, or at least it lightens the load of the need to have a full-time, AppSec person participating. And so that's part of solving this labor problem as well, I think, is shifting the work around and having tools enable that work.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So, like, let's maybe like to one sector we really want to focus on. As you guys talked about, there's so many sectors we could go over. We could even individually go on, but maybe before we go into our main topic, which is we want to talk about cloud security in general and kind of what's happening. Are there maybe just one sector that you guys would say beyond cloud security, you guys are like really just bullish on in general? Like this those are industries that you guys are most excited about. Maybe just one each, and then then we could jump into cloud security.
For me, it's the endpoint security. For me, it's going to be one of the
Oh,
fastest.
Jordan, I think you need
Sorry.
to speak up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Right. So yeah, endpoint security, I think, is going to be one of the fastest growing markets, but I think we might see a bit of a bifurcation occurring because the latest evolution of endpoint security has been XDR, so extended detection and response, and we've discussed this offline, Francis, because of the moves that the leading players in XDR have made, like Sentinel One, Palo Alto Networks, and CrowdStrike. They've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in order to get their back end data infrastructure in order. And for if you believe that data is foundational to a lot of these themes that we're seeing at the moment, it's also very foundational to the growth of cybersecurity. So I think um, going forward, these three players and any other endpoint security that has really revamped their back end data infrastructure is going to see a lot of growth because data is key. It's only going to become more and more important in order to for security vendors and organizations in order to manage their data to become more effective at managing cybersecurity and managing their security defenses. So the other endpoint players that are still using SIMs and kind of more legacy methods in order to extract and ingest data are probably going to fall behind those three key players.
Right. I would just say one word, which is convergence. I think it's happening within every niche field of cybersecurity. So from endpoint side, we have XDR, which is kind of converging the kind of SecOps and endpoint security. And we are also seeing that from the network security side, where we have the SASE and now SSE. So that is going to modularize various network security components all together as a subscription service. And we are also seeing that from the cloud security side, where we have tons of vendors providing an integrated platform serving various functions. So I think we are just converging.
And Cole, yeah, you had talked about customer identity and privacy in some of that area. Those are areas you're equally bullish on, right? And
Yeah, I may be a little bit biased because my identity or my background is a bit skewed towards identity, but I'm definitely especially high on identity right now. A couple reasons being the public identity companies, when you look at that broadly and include CyberArk, but also Okta, Ping Identity, ForgeRock, those are all pretty solid companies, even though their stocks haven't necessarily held up as well in this near term period. But I think realistically, I think they're all pretty solid companies that have solid products and a strong customer base, and I think that they'll all turn out fine. The other part that I would add about digital identity that makes me excited is earlier stage. So, looking at some fairly recent Momentum Cyber data, in the past 4 quarters, there have been 27 M&A events and 102 financing deals, and that's a lot. It's one of the most active sectors in all of cybersecurity, and so I think the future is bright from that standpoint as well.
that's interesting. That's a key data point that we could probably come back to at the end of this. So no, that's awesome. let's talk about cloud security now. Like, what are being the biggest changes in the architectural and some of just the technological advancements here in cloud security? Obviously, we know we've seen last year just how strong the big three cloud players have been resilient. Their phenomenal numbers have been really good, and we know many companies are in form of digital transformation. And so, I guess my question is more around in terms of the workloads moving to the cloud. What are some of the biggest architectural changes that we've seen over the last couple of years in cloud security? And Jordan, I could begin with you, then Simon, then Cole.
Right. So, um, well, we it might help the listener if we kind of take a step back and just think about why cybersecurity in general has grown in importance, and then could maybe dive into cloud security specifically. So, well, kind of not just going back a couple of years, going back over the decades, the importance in cybersecurity has grown with the increasing complexity of the computing landscape. Um, so if you think back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the computing landscape was really, really simple and easy to secure because the client and the server was in the same machine. Yeah, so the person requesting of information and the delivery of information was all done in the same machine, and also with the help of removable media like punch cards, etc. And then in the 1980s, we saw the rise of the client server model, where the server and the machine were separated. So the storing of information was on one machine, and that was separate to the machine that the user was using. And this was still quite easy to secure, because generally the client and server was in the same building. And then in the 90s, we saw the rise of data centers, where servers were all bunched together in a data center to achieve economies of scale. But that was still relatively easy to secure, because you had headquarters offices connecting into data centers, and you had that castle and moat corporate network that many have probably heard about. But then in the 2000s, we had the mobile era that brought in remote working, the beginning of remote working. And then in 2010, we saw the rise of cloud computing, which facilitated even greater remote working. And then, obviously, after the pandemic, um, we saw organizations having not just one single cloud that they're using, but multiple clouds that they're using. And then they've also got stuff at the edge and various things coming online, even managing their on-prem stuff as well. So now the landscape is extremely fragmented and difficult to secure, because the castle and moat corporate network has been completely obliterated, and cloud computing is a major driver of this fragmentation. Without the rise of cloud computing, we wouldn't be in this. Organizations wouldn't have this fragmentation right now, and so that's why cloud security is so important, because it's kind of playing catch up to manage this complexity that organizations are dealing with. And so, yeah, you've kind of, in the last 15 years, organizations have increasingly used cloud computing to benefit from the increasing layers of abstraction, from VMs to containers to serverless, and this has delivered extreme scalability and allowed organizations to reach their market very, very quickly. But because of that, organizations now have applications that were once dedicated to one server. Now they have applications broken up into various components across the cloud, across clusters, servers, VMs, and containers, and each of those components are connected to different microservices. And it's just a nightmare to try and manage because the environment is in constant flux, and a lot of these computing units, a lot of these cloud instances come and go, so they're ephemeral. So I just thought I'd just add that in just to paint the picture of why cloud security is so important, because obviously that's the topic of the discussion. It's important because of those trends. That's the state of the environment we're in right now. And yeah, I'm sorry, that's a long intro, but yeah, essentially it's still a very young market. There are some solutions in cloud security that have matured, but there's still a huge runway of growth, and it probably is the highest growing area of cybersecurity at the moment. But does anybody else want to stop me talking there and just say?
Yeah, I will take that one. So I think we will get started with talking about the cloud security TAM, the total addressable market. Typically, the way how we calculate it is that we will get started with the total amount of cloud spending TAM, and then times it with a percentage of that spending will go into cloud security. So, for example, if we assume that the cloud spending is 100 billion, and the spending over the security side is 2%, then we assume that the TAM for the cloud security is 2 billion. So I think what we are seeing is that we are seeing an increase in the percentage share for cloud security within the cloud spending bucket. And then we are also seeing an increase around the cloud spending. And I think a lot of it is driven by the pandemic, because previously, if you think about the real economic value for cloud, it isn't that obvious, because from our calculation, guys like AWS, their contribution margin is more than 60%, which means that this is a highly profitable infrastructure business. And you could have saved tons of money by building your own data center instead of going to the cloud. But what we are seeing is that the latest generation of cloud native solutions like Snowflake, who are built on top of very pricey cloud infrastructure, they are able to generate better value proposition relative to the pure on-prem self-managed solutions. So I think it's also part of it that is driving the cloud spending. And then going back to the development of cloud security, what I'm seeing is that in the early days, we got directly implanted virtual firewall, serving as kind of the gateway. When the traffic from the virtual machine goes out, you got scanned by the next generation firewall. But that is not an efficient model. And then we are coming out of sometime around 2015, we are seeing more native cloud security solutions. And I think they typically get started with gaining help the client gaining the visibility. What are your assets? Where are they going to? And then they will give you a risk assessment score. And also, as Jordan has alluded to, we are seeing a more parameterless world whereby everything is breaking down. So that means that it's harder to track everything. So gaining the visibility is one core value proposition for the cloud security products. And also what I'm seeing is that they tend to be focusing more about getting the API and then scanning through your environment. It's not like the firewall or secure web gateway that you have one solution that is directly blocking anything. And speaking of particular solution and acronym, I think we have the cloud security posture management, which is focusing over the misconfiguration. And I think it's a very interesting one to see that for the past 5 years, most of the high-profile cybersecurity and data breaches, they all can got started with kind of one particular misconfigured instances or products. So that's the most important one to watch. And then we have cloud workload protection, which is basically the endpoint security in the cloud. But it's getting more and more complex because to provide better security, you need to gain better understanding of the configurations and the metadata associated with one particular cloud platform that you are using. And then we have transformed into a little bit about identity. So it's cloud identity entitlement management, because if you have played with the cloud platform, you know that the identity and the role management is pretty vague. So you'll need some automated solution to help you manage with that. And then finally, what we are recently seeing is one thing called the CNAP, Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, which is a very long acronym, but basically what it means is combining the kind of misconfiguration management together with workload protection to aim on kind of delivering better overall security by converging all those things together. So
Yeah.
that's my part.
Yeah, I'll just something you missed one out, Simon. Obviously
Very
now
quickly, let's
you've
just
got.
for sure. Let me just hear from Cole really quickly. Like if Cole wants to quickly
All
react to
right,
that,
yeah,
and then
sure.
we could definitely come back to that for sure.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I just have a couple relatively quick points, and then we can discuss. So, one, Francis, is back to your kind of original prompt about architecture, and then two is related to a comment that Simon made about cloud scale, essentially. So, I read a quote that I thought was awesome from Dr. Anton Chuvakin's musings about the RSA conference, and what his observation was that I think speaks a lot to the state of cloud architecture today. Securing the past is still good business, but now securing the future is also good business. And essentially what he means by that is, security of on-premise infrastructure has always been a nice business, and that's sort of how we got to where we are today. But now there are enough workloads in the cloud that cloud security on its own is also a very good business. I think, though, reflecting from an architecture standpoint, we're going to be in this weird limbo land with a lot of companies for probably the next decade or longer. Like, if you look at some of the numbers, and I think some of Francis's threads actually get at some of this, the actual percentage of cloud workloads that have migrated, or of workloads that have migrated from on-premise to the cloud is astonishingly low. Despite the growth and size and scale of these cloud companies, there's actually still a long way to go. And I think just the reality for most companies that were not, born in the cloud, which is the majority of enterprises in the Fortune 500 today, it's still going to be a long process, and we're going to be looking at a split architecture between on-premise and cloud. The second point quickly was about scale. I wrote an article fairly recently called "The Mirage of Mandiant," and that was talking about the Google Cloud acquisition of Mandiant. And one of the observations in that, kind of an interesting anecdote when you put it in perspective, is that all of these cybersecurity companies, including the very biggest ones like CrowdStrike, Zscaler, et cetera, are really small when you compare that to the revenue of like an AWS or even a Google Cloud. And then especially when you roll it up one level higher, the level of Amazon, the revenue of Microsoft, the revenue of Google, all cybersecurity companies are tiny compared to that. And so things get really interesting in cloud security when you've got these cloud platforms with piles of money that are growing at exponential rates, buying up cloud cybersecurity companies. That's a really interesting trend, and the scale is just mind blowing. So I think that's just an overall macro thing that'll be fun to watch.
yeah, that's a fascinating point in terms of just it's kind of like perspective. We don't really think about it. We look at AWS number and we're like, wow, that's huge, but when you think about the runway that many of the security companies that especially providing workload security, when we think about the runway, I mean, it's quite possible. I mean, that we could see quite phenomenal numbers over the next few years. And I think that's something we don't really grasp in terms of just even how many workloads are still on-prem today. So I think that's a good point. Very quickly, maybe let's switch gears to like what are companies that we feel are going to be like key instrumental players within this ecosystem, and maybe there could be examples of some of the trends we've talked about around misconfiguration, workload management, same, and some of those pieces. Like, let's maybe talk. Maybe you guys could pick one company, one or two companies that you feel are going to be like fundamental winners within this market. So I'll start with you, Jordan, and again we'll go to Simon and then Cole.
Yeah. Well, I think the ultimate winners in cloud security will be the ones who can get to the CNAP first, so the Cloud Native Application Protection Platform, which incorporates what Simon mentioned, the CSPM, which is basically the detection and correction of misconfigurations at the infrastructure level within the cloud. Um, but then the kind of because of developers kind of running wild in the cloud and using infrastructure as code templates and setting off loads of alerts that from these CSPM systems, the shift has gone from right, okay, well, the CSPM feels quite detective in nature. So why don't we just prevent these alerts from triggering in the first place? So that's kind of moved the industry towards thinking about shift left. So as Cole mentioned earlier, baking in security when developers are actually doing things right from the get-go, whether they're writing code or whether they're provisioning stuff on the cloud, get the security baked in. So yeah, you've seen the shortcomings of CSPM, cloud security posture management, kind of drive the need for shift left. And shift left generally is those two categories. The way I understand it, anyway, is kind of shift left. You have code security, but also security for developers using these automation tools to provision infrastructure. And then, as Simon mentioned, after that, you kind of have the cloud load workload protection stuff, which is all about having an agent of some description on these hosts, and they can detect and block threats that's occurring on the hosts. Um, and then we have the cloud infrastructure entitled management, and also micro segmentation. I'll throw micro segmentation in there as well, because those two things collectively are all about giving permissions to say, right, okay, this user and machine is only allowed to connect with this machine, function and service, etc. And that's a huge area, because manually setting these permissions in the cloud is a headache, and often you'll find that IT administrators will just give excessive permissions, so things are talking to each other about that shouldn't be allowed to. So that's a big vulnerability and something that bad actors look to exploit. And then you've got the CASB as well, so the Cloud Access Security Broker, which is kind of monitoring and protecting data within these software as a service apps. So collectively, CSPM, shift left stuff, the cloud workload protection stuff, the entitled management, and the microsegmentation and CASB, collectively they make up the CNAP. Yeah, so it looks like it's a race to who can do the CNAP first, and according to Gartner, no one is quite there yet. But mine and Simon's take is that the ones that are getting close to CNAP are Palo Alto Networks, Zscaler, and also Orca Security. I mean, Orca Security. I think that, well, before the market meltdown, their valuation was around 2 billion, but they're growing fast, and they're highly highly respected in the private VC world, and they are kind of like a next gen CSPM provider. So a very expanded version of CSPM. Everything they do is agentless. And they just using APIs from cloud providers in order to monitor things, detect things, and alert things. And recently, they actually have also gone into the shift left area as well. So yeah, so Palo Alto Networks, Zscaler, Orca Security, and there's also the likes of CrowdStrike and SentinelOne. They've got a narrower scope within the CNAP, but I think they're making the inroads in order to get to this CNAP platform. So I think for me, those are the key players at the moment.
Right.
Would you add any companies to that list again? Simon specifically. Let's maybe specifically talk about companies.
Yeah, okay. Well, Palo Alto Networks, I would say they are the closest to having this CNAP, this full CNAP platform. Zscaler aren't far behind. Orca Security are now not far behind. You also have GitLab and Sneak, but at the moment they've they've originated from the shift left side, and they do all the shift left, so the infrastructure provisioning security and also the code security, but they've got a long way to go before they become a fully fledged CNAP platform. So yeah, a very best of breed and got a bright future, but for me, it's just because the reason I'm more bullish on whoever can get to the CNAP platform first is because we know that cloud security and SaaS in general is incredibly fragmented. Organizations have hundreds of SaaS apps and applications, and lots and lots of different cloud security providers and cybersecurity in general. And I just think my take is, in order to generate the next wave of value from this extreme fragmentation, there needs to be some sort of consolidation, or centralization or aggregation, whatever you want to call it. And this could indirectly happen for the vendors that get to CNAP first, because then they have a wider scope and they can muscle out the more narrowly scoped players. So I think this is the only way really to generate the next wave of value for the industry because of the fragmentation. So I think there's just going to be, whereas in recent years there's been innumerable winners within the SaaS landscape, I think over the next few years there's going to be fewer winners, but those winners will be bigger winners. If that makes sense.
Got it. Got it. Very quickly, I would really want to hear from Cole. Yeah, Cole, do you have are there any other companies that you think are interesting, kind of winning the space? And then after Cole, I would like to call up CJ just to maybe talk more about what's happening within the DevSecOps ecosystem. But Cole, yeah, you go first.
Yeah, maybe going a little bit earlier stage, just for the the sake of diversity in the discussion and not to repeat things. I think I think there's a couple obvious ones. I mean, I think you have to talk about Wiz, like Orca was another really good call out, but those are just companies that are pretty far along, but they're really good at what they do, and I think really moving that entire segment forward. A couple more that are maybe nominally cloud security or related to cloud security, but I think are very relevant companies. Panther is a company that I would like to learn a lot more about, but I think is very interesting. The reason why I think it is interesting is because it's essentially build your own SIM, for lack of a better term. And so I think with the desire for especially highly technical companies to have a bit more control over the way that they are running their security operations, they kind of give you the components or the building blocks to do so. And so I think that's very interesting. The other one, which is, I mean, kind of almost flipping it completely around, but I just think a really interesting company, WorkOS builds a platform that essentially allows any application. So if you're building, a SaaS application, you can put identity into it. and build it on top of the Work OS platform. So it's kind of more than an Auth0 or even like a Stitch. Like it really gives you all the way from like user management, through a lot of things that you need to integrate your application in an enterprise environment. And so I say that that's kind of coming from the other way because like they're not like protecting the cloud directly. They're like protecting the SaaS applications that run in the cloud. So it's a step away, but I think they're doing a lot for the space. So those are my thoughts on a couple.
Awesome. Makes a lot of sense. That makes sense. I'm surprised nobody has talked about Lacework. Simon, if you looked at Lacework, just really quickly, I'm just really curious. If
Yeah.
anyone has.
Well, actually, my pick are GitLab, Palo Alto Networks, and the Oka. But speaking of Lacework, I think it's getting kind of hyped, and it is. I think it's amongst the earliest one to get into the cloud security game compared to Wage Security, Oka Security, and this one it is special in the sense that it is agent based, unlike Oka and Wage Security, who are completely agentless and API based. But I do see their value proposition that is use agent to gain process level understanding about what's going on. So that's their secret sauce. But speaking of their valuation, I think it's more than 12 billion US dollars. And at this environment, I think is overhyped. And then think about the comparison between Lacework and the Oka security. So one from agent understanding about the process, and the other is about agentless, but having the API access to the block storage of all your production system. I think Oka potentially could deliver a more comprehensive cloud security. So that's what I'm saying.
Got it.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah. It's the trade-off between having the agentless solutions and the agent-based solutions, though, isn't it? For me, Orca is completely agentless, and Sam, we spoke briefly about this, but if being completely agentless, they they can monitor things, detect, and make alerts, but they can't directly stop and eliminate threats. So they might be able to do that indirectly with other tools, or it provides something for the security analyst to remotely contain and eliminate the threat. But being agentless, they won't be able to actually eliminate the threat themselves like an agent-based solution can. And this is kind of contrary to the enthusiasm for Orca security, because they are a next gen security player, no doubt. Having this agentlessness is really attractive because, well, it's attractive from a business perspective because very frictionless deployment. Because all you got to do is just connect Orca security software to the cloud network, and it will detect where the hosts are and then begin monitoring things. Whereas, an agent-based deployment is a lot more involved and more investment in time and money. And IT departments know this as well, because you've got to install an agent on every single host. So there's more business risk to that. It's more potentially disruptive. So Orca security, in terms of being able to scale its business and also having a next gen solution, has a very bright future. But it's just, for me, it's just they can't actually eliminate the threats directly. So I think you really need a mix of agentless solutions and also agent-based solutions. So Lacework is all agents, Orca is all agentless. But the listeners might get bored of me going on about Palo Alto Networks, but Palo Alto Networks has a mixture of agentless and agent-based solutions, and I think that is probably the best balance going forward for cloud security. Just to get that balance of agentless solutions where needed, because not everything. I mean, if you're doing something, if organizations have something like serverless, they don't actually have access to the host, so you need an agentless solution there. But there's other cases where, you know, if you want to detect and remove that threat straight away, an agent is required. So yeah, I don't know if you have any views on that, Cole.
Well, yeah, I think that's one potential threat to this work, because I think another trend that is not about cloud security, but it's more from the endpoint security side of the world, is that we are seeing that endpoint guys, they are smoothing other agent-based solution guys out. So think about Sentinel-1, think about CrowdStrike. Their strategy right now is trying to figure out what are the other solutions that require an agent, but I can do it integratively within my endpoint protection software suite, instead of having you to install, say, more than 10 agents within one device. And they got started with SIEM. So SIEM, you need an agent to collect in docs and information. So they are kind of trying to smoothing out various players. And on that front, I think this work is kind of in a middle ground, because you do provide great value to your end users, but you are still an agent. And I don't see why not? Why Sentinel-1, CrowdStrike, and others, why don't they provide this kind of visibility? And in fact, they are providing that with XDR, but so it doesn't take them too much effort to move one step forward towards what this work currently is doing. So that's another potential risk factor to this work, and I think it's overhyped.
Got it.
Yeah, my only
Cool.
addition quickly would be from like a business perspective. Um, my view is that this segment of the ecosystem is, I don't want to say probably, but possibly not like going to be able to support standalone publicly traded companies. I would just be really surprised if the endpoint protection companies like CrowdStrike and Sentinel-1, who are all very well capitalized and financially healthy, I would be shocked if they let this segment get away. Like right now, I think everybody's kind of trying to figure it out, and they're trying to, build their own solutions. And we're in this very early stage of the adoption curve, and so right now there's a lot of back and forth in terms of product and approach. Maybe the solutions that they're building on their own will work, but if they're not, I feel like they would spend essentially any sum of money to make sure that they are the dominant players in that space.
Got it. Got it. I think that's also another interest, especially like a CrowdStrike whose stock has held up relatively better. They have a good balance sheet. They're generating a lot of cash. I wouldn't be surprised exactly if they made some kind of an acquisition to get into some of those senior spaces. So that's awesome. Would like to
Hey,
call up here like
Francis, we have
Hello
a
there.
couple of requests to speak. CJ, and also Fernan. Can
Yeah, I think for sure. Like, so I think we want to go with CJ first here. So CJ, just so some people know he works at Sneak. And I'll let him maybe introduce himself. He knows a lot about the DevSecOps space, and he's seen the evolution of the industry, and he's extremely well versed and knowledgeable there on the finance and technology side. So, maybe CJ kind of maybe give an introduction about yourself and maybe tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing in the DevSecOps and shift left ecosystem.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on. This has been a lot of fun to listen to. You guys definitely do your homework, and it's refreshing to hear this perspective. So I've been at Sneak for about 3 years now. This is just my opinion of kind of where I see it going. And I believe that there's a new category really emerging, and a couple of you hit on it earlier, and I think it's developer security. Because in order to be protected, organizations, they need to secure their IT infrastructure. So you look at the likes of Zscaler, which will handle your IT infra, your endpoints, which CrowdStrike will secure, your identities, which Okta handles, and then you're left with how do you secure your code. And that code is powering your applications, your supply chain, and increasingly that cloud infrastructure. And that's really the space that I'm in. And the developers are working faster and their roles are expanding. So what I'm observing is that we joke that developers used to be in the basement of an org and now they're really in the penthouse. They're the ones that are driving the innovation and making a lot of decisions. And digital transformation, that's led to a monumental change really in how they work. Deployments, they used to be sporadic, and developers and ops, they were siloed, and the dev models, they were rigid, and the supply chains were limited, and that's really not true today at all. Developers want to deploy code continuously, and DevOps is blurring the line between the developers and operations, and those teams are using these agile development frameworks, and the supply chains are huge. They're vast and they're difficult to control. Supply chain's a huge piece that was briefly mentioned earlier, and as all this is going on, I think that security, it really hasn't come along for the ride in a lot of ways. It's still slow and costly and delivered through teams through reactive remediation. And that model, I mean, it doesn't scale when you want to go fast. And the paradigm has to change a bit in order to embed that security earlier in the process. And that's really what I think people mean when they say shift left. It's become kind of a buzzword, but it's embedding it earlier in the process. And I wrote down on a piece of paper just a couple of, game changers that have occurred over the last 2 years. So you had SolarWinds, that was a supply chain hack, right? And that hit 18,000 organizations back in December of 2020. You had Colonial Pipeline. I bet you remember that. That was an attack that crippled fuel deliveries on the East Coast back in May of 21. And then Log4Shell was really the biggest, in my opinion. That was a 0-day exploit through a predominant open source library. And, all of this is exacerbated by the growing gap between developers and security professionals. Somebody said it earlier, but there's 600,000 unfilled cybersecurity positions in the U.S. And there are 32 million devs in the world today, forecasted to grow to 45 million by, the next 3 years. So that ratio isn't slowing down. And neither is kind of the need to develop fast, deploy fast, innovate fast, and all really from the business perspective, which it comes back to is how do I stay competitive? So those are just my quick hit thoughts on kind of what I'm seeing going on.
Yeah, I would just add a tiny bit to that. Is what CJ's just pointed out is that security, like we mentioned earlier, security is increasingly being coupled or wanting to be coupled with other areas of the business, whether it's networking. We're seeing security converge with networking to deliver better productivity. We're seeing security converge with identity to make accessing apps more convenient for users, and also adding more security. And now we're seeing security merging with software engineering in order to bake in security right from the onset when developers are doing their work. So yeah, it's really, really good for if you're an investor or just a stakeholder in cybersecurity, because it's merging with all these different components.
Very quickly, I had a question in terms of we haven't really talked about Cloudflare. So Cloudflare is a company, and you guys have probably seen they've been really putting out some aggressive blogs claiming about how they have the best SASE and zero trust network relative to like the likes of Zscaler, especially for cloud security. So I don't know, maybe very quickly, if one of you want to tackle that one, like how do you guys see Cloudflare's infrastructure? Because we haven't really mentioned Cloudflare this evening, and I feel like they're going to be one of the beneficiaries, although maybe not as much as some of these other players, but I think they're coming from a different angle in terms of how they're tackling SASE. So how do you guys
Yeah.
see them evolving in this space, especially relative to some of the other players? Yeah, and then we'll kind of
Yeah,
come
I
back.
think we should start with a little bit of distinction between security delivered from the cloud and the security developed for the cloud. So Zscaler and Cloudflare and the various SASE players, they 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 are also categorized as cloud security vendor, but for me they should be called cloud delivered security vendor. So there is a nuanced distinction here. And I would say that Cloudflare is very strong in the sense that it got started as a CDN vendor, so it's not a pure security vendor trying to block anything. Its main job was to help developers' life easier, so they have very high net promoter score. Basically, if you talk to anyone who have played with Cloudflare, their impression over the brand is very high. And I think that that's what is driving its enterprise adoption as well, because its SASE is not only powerful in from the networking perspective, but also in terms of its speed of innovation. So it is able to build so many functions, um, rising on par with other competitors like Zscaler within a very short period of time. So I think it's also a very strong competitor. But speaking of the cloud native security, I think it could be Cloudflare's weakness because it wants to be kind of an independent cloud because it's also providing the worker, which is serverless, in kind of their version of infrastructure as a service. So they want not to compete with AWS, GCP, and Azure, not directly from the virtual machine and the container, but from the serverless front. So I think that that's a good thing for developers, but also a bad thing because therefore they don't have too much incentive to build a very comprehensive cloud security covering AWS and the other environments.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, Francis. Just a little bit to add with Cloudflare. Um, Gartner recently rejiggled their definition of SASE to make it SSE, which was just Secure Service Edge. And what Secure Service Edge entails, it includes zero trust, a secure web gateway, and it includes CASB as well. Um, and it's quite interesting that Cloudflare wasn't included in the Magic Quadrant. Um, and it's because when we say CASB, there's two different types of CASB. There's inline CASB, which is bundled together with the firewall and the secure web gateways. But there's also out of band CASB, which is monitoring data in these SaaS apps, kind of data at rest, and using APIs to monitor things. And interestingly, Cloudflare had an out of band CASB that was in beta for almost 2 years, and but they never brought it to made it commercially available, and this is why Gartner didn't include Cloudflare in the Magic Quadrant because they didn't have the out of band CASB. That's what Gartner views as most important, is the out of band component, and it got us thinking, like, wow, that's really interesting. Why did it take Cloudflare almost 2 years to develop an out of band CASB? And it's because Cloudflare are typically, well, they've originated from being an inline security player. Well, originated with CDNs, but then moved on to being an inline security vendor. So checking, inspecting data in motion, being in line with the traffic. Um, and yeah, I think you'll find that it's really difficult for security vendors that originate in being in line to them actually transitioning to being an out of band security player. Like, so going from inspecting data in motion to inspecting data at rest, it's a different skill set. So that was quite interesting. And however, now Cloudflare, they kind of just bit the bullet and made an acquisition, and they bought Vectrix, which was a best of breed out of band CASB player. So now when Gartner redoes their secure service edge Magic Quadrant, you should see Cloudflare in there. But I just think that's quite interesting and insightful that even though Cloudflare is extremely talent dense, it's just not easy to switch from being an inline security player to an out of band one. Also, so
Got it.
I think this is one of the reasons why Palo Alto Networks a few years ago, obviously they're an inline security player, but we wanted to get into cloud, and it's like, well, how long is it going to take them to build up the skills in order to do that? It could take them years, and I think that's why they just thought, right, we're just going to have to make acquisitions at a rapid rate in order to build a presence in this cloud security game. Yeah, quite interesting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, I think we'll get to Fernando really quickly, and then I think we'll just wrap it up with just the vendor consolidation question around like what we see or general things, and then we could probably take a few questions after the vendor consolidation piece. So first of all, maybe let's just go to Fernando. Fernando, like if you wanted to add anything very quickly.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here. Sorry, first time caller. I follow Cole online and saw that he was here. Just by way of introductions, I'm an industry analyst at Omdia, and I cover specifically cloud security and SASE. So it was really interesting to hear the conversation here. I just wanted to add a couple of comments, if I may. When people, I think that the point about the vendors you called out are current for cloud security are certainly the ones that I get to hear a lot about as well. Orca, Palo Alto, etc. And the one point I'll make is that on the agentless versus agent aspect, one of the considerations is that you don't necessarily need, in a cloud environment, you don't necessarily need your security tool to do that blocking. It's going to be done by the cloud platform itself. So whereas an agent-based solution can control the host and do things, you can still block things just by leveraging the cloud APIs that we use in the first place. So that was one point. Also, CrowdStrike, they do have their own CSPM. They built something called Horizon, right? So to the comment about the Sentinel-1 and CrowdStrike coming into this, CrowdStrike's already here, right? And but I thought that was relevant. And one final comment I wanted to make is I love the conversation. I think that one of the aspects we may be ignoring a little bit is to what extent is the cloud security conversation much more an organizational aspect within customers than something that's going to be solved by security, right? And I think we had someone here from Sneak before. Sneak and GitLab and Datadog and Sysdig and those vendors that play to those audiences, they are also heavy contenders for solving the security problem at organizations. Anyway, I just wanted to share a couple of data points and hopefully help the conversation move along. Thank you. And with that,
That's awesome. Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks. Thanks for that. I think that's a really helpful context in of itself. Cole or Jordan, did you guys want to react to that really quickly?
I think awesome points.
Yeah.
I appreciate the clarification about CrowdStrike. I was trying to say that earlier and didn't quite get it out as eloquently as Fernando did. I guess my point was just that, they're kind of playing in that area right now, but like the question is, will the Horizon product that they have built actually end up winning, or will they have to sort of junk it and end up acquiring another company? Like, I don't know the answer to the sort of rhetorical question, but I think, that's a really good point. Yeah, no, I think you guys should have Fernando on sometime. That's my other comment.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think Corrado has made lots of great points. And I would also say, yeah, indeed, GitLab and Datadog, they're holding great assets, and they can really expand into this area. And then the question is really how I think they share a similar problem with CrowdStrike in the sense that they are not a native vendor in terms of kind of API based security at rest vendor. So it would be potentially hard for them to break into this. But we are seeing early endeavors for Datadog as well. So it's trying to do kind of same and kind of building more security related function with APM. So yeah, it's a very interesting place to observe as well.
Yeah, I would just add, sorry, just to chime in for a second. I think that this interplay between observability and security is something that we should pay attention to, just because we are all, after all, we're speaking with the same data source, right? At the end of the day, we're monitoring system calls on a host, and if I can get that data from one single location and use it for both observability and security, that's an interesting proposition. You're absolutely right
Yeah,
that they don't have,
exactly.
yeah, they don't have the same entry into the security buyer, but it's a very interesting space. Absolutely. Sorry, I'll shut up
Yeah,
now.
yeah, exactly. Because I think another pretty kind of shocking data point for me personally is that ETR, they did a survey about what's the primary user within an organization who procured observability products. And in fact, the top one user is SecOps. So security guys, they use observability products a lot. So that's one potential place where either security guys, they can break into observability. So what's happening with Sentinel-1 and the CrowdStrike, or observability guys like Splunk and Datadog, they can break into security. But my personal take is that Sentinel-1 is primed to do this because they acquired Scalar and their data backend is pretty interesting, and that they can combine, they can directly use their agent that is right now protecting the endpoint and expand it into observability as well.
Got it. Got it. No, that helpful. Okay, I just wanted to ask about in general, kind of concluding a little bit here with like vendor consolidation. I mean, who are some of the biggest players that you guys feel would at the end of this pandemic, or sorry, I said pandemic, but more like this bear market, acquire, absorb the most? Maybe it could be M&A, it could be a lot of talent they're able to bring in, it could be technology they're able to acquire. So it's kind of like, what do you guys see in terms of just the overall trend in vendor consolidation, and then what companies do you think are kind of well positioned to capitalize on these trends?
Yeah.
Jordan, and then maybe Cole, and then Simon.
Well, I think consolidation could happen in a number of ways. Um, you've kind of, well, you've got this race to the CNAP platform back, you know, as vendors are broadening their capabilities, they look more attractive to CISOs potentially, and that could indirectly put out some smaller niche players out of the market. But also we might see a resumption of private equity firms buying up some legacy players, or kind of not, maybe not legacy players, but just vendors that have seen their growth slow down. So we might see some consolidation there, and also just some cash-rich tech giants, like we're seeing Google buy acquire Mandiant. And we might see some more of that as well, especially at these low valuation levels, as these bigger tech players are looking for bargains. And also on the venture capital side, potentially, with if interest rates do remain high, VCs might have to be more selective in where they put their money, and that kind of might limit the continuation of fragmentation in the SaaS and the cybersecurity and the cloud security market. So I think there's yeah, it can this consolidation aggregation can occur from a number of ways. Um, I've already expressed who I think are going to be the potential players. Does anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with everything Jordan just said, so I'm not going to repeat that. I'll just make a couple more additions, starting macro and then kind of working down. So Francis just posted a thread that was a super interesting thread in general. This would be number 15 in the tweet or in the thread, actually cited like a pretty interesting Momentum Cyber slide that goes back all the way to 1999 and essentially puts M&A and financing activity on a graph with overlays for every, economic downturn that occurred within that period. It's just really interesting to look at, and I think very relevant the current times, if history repeats itself. But the punchline there is like we're going to see a slowdown for a little while here, and then kind of depending on how long exactly the downturn lasts, that's where some of the M&A starts to uptick, and that's fairly consistent with some of the things that the momentum and the Night Dragon folks said at RSA. On a more micro level, different than what was mentioned before, I would keep an eye on the Thoma Bravo acquired SailPoint. So they've gone private. That transaction should close quickly if it already hasn't, or if it already if it already hasn't. But I would bet that they're up to something. Like I think that there's some internal things at SailPoint that they're going to want to fix, although it's already a relatively healthy company. I think a big part of this is going to be capital, and acquiring other companies and making SailPoint a more broad-based identity platform. So that's definitely something I would look for as well.
Yeah, I think a little bit commenting on Cole's last point about SailPoint. I think Thoma Bravo's acquisition of SailPoint, they got started because personally, from our perspective, I think SailPoint and CyberArk, they are in a dire place because you have Okta that is actively eyeing on expanding into IGA, identity governance, and PAM, the privilege access management. And SailPoint and CyberArk, to me, they are kind of the legacy player that are primarily focused over on-prem solutions instead of cloud-native solutions. And Okta, it has a great chance to smooth them out. So I think that's part of the reason why Thoma Bravo acquired SailPoint. And going back to the kind of consolidation and the M&A thing, I think one general observation is that I think cybersecurity is a great industry. We don't typically see bankruptcy like what we see in other like a commodity industry. So we will see private equity buyout and some big acquisitions made by tech giants or cash-rich, more established firms. But for me, my personal judgment is that a lot of consolidation has been done last year. So, for example, in the legacy sector, like consumer endpoint protection, we have seen tons of consolidation with McAfee, and then Avast, and Norton. So I don't think that is going to repeat anytime soon. But one potential M&A thing, I think it would be for the technology giants and the more cash-rich companies like SentinelOne or CrowdStrike. They could potentially exploit this big drawdown in the private valuation and potentially buy some promising startups, be it acquiring talent or expand their product line.
The other one that I should have actually added that's an interesting one is Zscaler. Their CEO just made a pretty hilarious comment about valuations being reasonable now. They haven't really done a lot of acquisitions in a while, but he said in not so many words that they're going to get back in the game. So I think that's another one to look out for too.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I don't think they've done much. I mean, I think the Smoke Screen, I believe, was like the one company they acquired probably a couple of months ago. But yeah, they haven't been active. But yeah, I suspect all of these companies, I think it'd be interesting to watch what they do towards the end of the year here. So, no, that's good. Maybe one last question, and then I don't know if we have any people who, if there's any audience kind of Q&A, we could kind of wrap up here. I just want to address this one. I want to ask you guys, the cloud providers themselves, like Amazon, Google, GCP, and the likes of those three cloud providers, they're also investing heavily into cloud security. And I think one question I've received as well is just like, what about those guys? Aren't they spending on kind of buffering the workloads that are going in? Could they almost take market share away from some of the other players that we've mostly discussed today, like Walker and CrowdStrike? So do you guys maybe have any answers, like just provide any answers in general to kind of what those guys are doing? And Fernando, if you want to go here, please go for it.
Yeah, so let me chime in, because this is like, I've been following cloud security for about, what, 5 years now, and this is one of the areas where, it's interesting to follow the evolution of cloud security as you track the evolution of endpoint security. And if you go back to old endpoint security, right, or what would happen? We deployed McAfee and Symantec and others, right, Norton, right, because there was no built-in capability. Well, the cloud providers have built-in security capabilities, right? And even on the endpoint space, we can argue that Microsoft has added built-in security capability with Defender. So to your point about them taking market share, I don't think it's so much that they're taking too much market share, but it's that if I am a smart product manager working in one of these cloud native companies, what I'm looking for every opportunity I have of leveraging what technology the cloud provider is already giving me, right? Provided that the cost is not too high. So they will. I think that there will be a place for third party, because there is a need for multi cloud, but there is absolutely capabilities being driven by the cloud provider that some people are going to respond to that. I have a line that says that the multi-cloud is super interesting, but multi-cloud is an emergent property of a company. I see very, very few projects that are multi-cloud. I see many companies that are multi-cloud, but individual projects are not. Anyway, this is a sorry, barging in, but just to comment that yes, the cloud providers have capability, but yes, there is a place for third party as well.
Yeah, I think I am generally more bearish on a potential hyperscaler kind of smoothing smaller players out, because I think generally what you are seeing is that these guys, they are not really competing with cutting edge startups. Generally, they will only provide more commoditized functions, and provided when the market is very mature. And by that time, I think a lot of experts are already lower value added. And so I think it wouldn't pose a great threat to startups that are constantly innovating. And I think the runway for innovation right now is still huge, because we are still in the early stage of moving into cloud, and then use container, and then using serverless and the various other components. So I think it is less likely that they will kill any reasonable third-party cybersecurity vendors. And another good example, I think, is Netscope. So Netscope got started as a CASB player, and back then CASB was very crowded. And what I'm seeing is that other CASB players who got acquired by tech giants, they didn't thrive. Instead, Netscope is the only standalone CASB player survived, and then it thrived. It expanded into SASE, and it's going everywhere, and the valuation just gone up and up every year. So I think it's a very telling sign that acquiring startups and also kind of trying to build your built-in security capability. For most tech giants, it doesn't really work. And the best player emerged, I think, at the end of the day, is a standalone company with whom the founder has a strong vision and the grit to make it really work. And to me, that's also the reason why I am kind of bearish over GCP's acquisition of Mandiant. I think it's more about a financial sale. I mean, Mandiant is really trying to figure out who are the interested buyer, and the Google, they are really trying very hard to expand into the enterprise service. But to me, they don't really have that enterprise service in gene. They have created tons of great projects like Beyond Cope, which is actually one of the very first zero trust project and the solution back in sometime 2015. But they didn't really scale it up. They have very good product market fit in my perspective, but their go-to market is super weak. So the general trend is that Google employees created very nice enterprise technology, and then they go out and create their own startup. So I don't see that would work the other way around.
Got it. Got it. Super helpful. Okay, awesome. As long if you guys don't have anything to add there, I think yeah. So if no one has any questions, I think I'll just kind of give you guys is the final word. I mean, just kind of final word. What are you guys looking forward to in terms of security over the next few months, and just like final words in general, and then we'll kind of call it up. And maybe
Okay.
Jordan, we'll start, and then we'll go to Cole, and then and Simon.
Yeah. Okay. Very, very quickly. Cloud security, XDR, SASE, and also the security operations side that is supplementing the XDR side as well. Yeah, I think those are going to be the major trends.
Yeah, I've talked like pretty publicly about one that I think is underrated, which is password management, enterprise password management in general, and 1Password specifically. So I think, like that's a company that has been plugging away at this for going on 18 years now. They've been through all these recessions, and and they did it without any venture. Now they have tons of it. So I think, that's definitely a specific company that I'm excited about. And then, just watching the M&A in general, I mean, I think we're probably overdue for some of that. And I think you're going to see some companies make some moves, and there'll be some fun things happening. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is that a lot of things are turning into data engineering problems. So it's the same to the cybersecurity and cloud security as well. So keep an eye on vendors who have better use of data, who have better sources of data, and who have more efficient data backend to generate more valuable information to the end customer.
Awesome. And Fernando, do you have any final words? We were just curious to hear your final thoughts. I
Of,
think
of,
you gave
of
it.
course, like I absolutely love this conversation. So thank you for having me and giving me some time. I'll say one thing. I think that what we're observing now on is that there is a lot. Uh, I just came back from RSA, right? And one of the things that I noticed is that it's really like there wasn't that much new to begin with. So now it's much more about what are we doing to internalize, and what are we doing to operationalize what we already have. Over the next few months, I am definitely looking to see what's happening at Black Hat. So that'll be nice to go back there. And I urge people to, if you are interested at all in cloud security, you absolutely want to be up to speed with what's happening at. I mean, AWS has Reinforce coming up in late July, and then in October, the Cloud Native Computing Foundation has KubeCon Americas conference. For those that don't know, KubeCon is the KubeCon slash CNCFCon is the conference for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and by my estimate, easily 30% of the vendors on the floor at KubeCon are either security vendors or have security capabilities for cloud native. Super interesting event to be aware of. But yeah, I think that that's what I have in mind for the next few months. Oh yeah, and I'm personally writing a ton about SASE, but that's my coverage, right?
Absolutely. Awesome. Thank you so much. Absolutely, that I think that's great. And I think we're all gonna keep an eye on that. But yeah, in general, like thanks everyone. Really appreciated all of your thoughts. I know we went on different circles in this conversation, but I think the big takeaway for everyone working out of this should just be obviously we continue to see the cybersecurity budgets are relatively holding up, and they should stay quite resilient for at least the next maybe 3 to 6 months at least. And then cloud security, we believe, would be one of the fastest growing industries. And I believe we've talked to some of the companies. We talked to Cloudflare. We talked to the endpoint providers. We talked a little bit about Sneak and some of the DevSecOps trends. And I think in general, we're all going to be watching this. So I would say thank you to everyone. I would recommend whoever's listening or whoever listens to this after to the recording, definitely follow the blogs of Cole, Strategy or Security, Convequity with Jordan. They have a Convequity Substack page. I highly recommend you guys check them out. You've done a lot of work around obviously next generation firewall, cloud native security. And yeah, that it's been really good having you guys, and thanks Fernando for chipping in your thoughts. So yeah, with that, we would maybe like to end it here, and just say thanks everyone, and good night, good morning wherever you are, and yeah, we'll continue the conversations on Twitter. So thanks guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.